Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your testimonies. Very, very helpful to the subcommittees. And just a couple of opening questions. First, to Dr. Delmonico. You mentioned that Wang Jifu is, and we know that he's the former deputy health minister and chairman of the Human Organ Donation and Transplant Committee, among other things. And my question is, and before I get to it, I've worked human rights issues in China for 36 years, from my very first election in 1980 during the Ronald Reagan years. And obviously, Tiananmen Square was a game changer, and then sadly it was a major reversal for democracy and universally recognized human rights. The students were repressed. But throughout it all, beginning in 1982, 83, I began raising the issue of forced abortion and forced sterilization in China, only to be met with aggressive denials by the Chinese government, by the UNFPA, by many pro-abortion activists in the United States and in Europe. And in 1985, in this room, we had a hearing. I wasn't chairman at the time. The Democrats ran the House. And we had Foreign Service officers telling us that it's over, it's finished, gone. And I put exclamation points on that it was largely a 1983 high tide experience, as they called it, that this was. And then Michael Weisskopf from the Washington Post did a 3-part expose, page 1. He's the bureau chief for the Washington Post, who absolutely blew the lid off the apologists who were out there saying there's nothing to worry about here. There's no forced abortion and no forced sterilization. I traveled to China many times. I met with Peng Pei-yong, the woman who ran the program, a face-to-face meeting with State Department personnel sitting there. And she said, these are all lies. There's no coercion whatsoever in the People's Republic of China, despite the evidence that is absolutely overwhelming and verified by all the major human rights organizations. After Tiananmen Square, I went to a gulag, a Laogai called Beijing Prison Number 1, and the Chinese government told me that there were no political prisoners, as they have said throughout every meeting I've ever had with them. I saw them. There were 40 of them there who were, and the warden, Warden Zhou, said 40 of these people were on the square, and they wouldn't let us talk to them. So when Che Ha-tien, the operational commander, came to the United States, got a 19-gun salute by President Bill Clinton, which I thought was an abomination. Here's the man who sent in the killers that crushed the dissent at Tiananmen Square. He went to the Army War College and said, no one died at Tiananmen Square. In 2 days, I put together a hearing in 2172 as chairman of the Human Rights Committee. We invited several people who gave compelling testimony that students and others were killed at Tiananmen Square, that he was a liar. We invited the embassy to send somebody. We invited Che Ha-tien to come. Obviously, we had an empty chair, and we had that very prominently displayed. But we had people from Time Magazine, People's Daily, a journalist who actually went to prison for trying to expose what was happening because he sided with the students, all tell their stories, and some of the students themselves. So Che Ha-tien, in the light of all the glare here in Washington, D.C., said nobody died in Tiananmen Square. A couple weeks ago, I had another hearing on torture in China. There have been 2 horrific reports, horrific in terms of what they found, by the Special Rapporteur for Torture in China. This is the UN Special Rapporteur. And we had people at this hearing, including one Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist, I'm trying to get his name, who told us how he sat in the tiger torture chair for 1 month and 22 days, had a large picture of what it looked like. And we've had Christians, Pentecostals, Falun Gong, and others all tell us how they have been subjected to this horrific torture chair. It's only one of many tools, horrible tools, used by the Chinese government. Previously, 20 years before that, I had a hearing of 6 survivors of the Laogai, including a Tibetan Buddhist monk, Palden Gyatso, who brought in the cattle prods that were used under his arms, on his genitals, in his mouth. And when he tried to get in through security here in the Rayburn building, they stopped him. I had to come down and escort him. And he said, this is what they do to us every single day. I have raised that issue with the Chinese government in Beijing, in Shanghai, and here in the United States through hearings, through meetings, over and over again, and they categorically deny that there is any torture, and the torture chair, the tiger chair, does not exist. On human trafficking, I've written 4 major laws. The major law on human trafficking, known as the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. China is a basket case when it comes to trafficking, labor and sex trafficking, a magnet in large part because of the missing girls, tens of millions of girls who don't exist because of gendercide, the direct killings through sex selection, abortion of the girl child. And that has led to a magnet effect of trafficking, plus they announced that they were getting rid of the Laogai system. It was another subterfuge because they didn't. They just transferred that whole process. I chair the China Commission as well. We were hopeful that this was real and durable. It was absolutely not real and durable. It was just a transfer of how they deal with this idea of reform through labor, and it's just as egregious as it was before. I could go on in every category of human rights category. There's no censorship, even though I held all the hearings with Google, Microsoft, Cisco, sitting here under oath saying that they're not part of the censorship. So if you put Tiananmen Square in what was then Google CN, you got wonderful pictures of happy tourists. If you put Google here in the United States, you got pictures of tanks. So censorship is very real, and I tried it at a Beijing internet cafe, and I couldn't get my name. When I put in anything with torture, I got Guantanamo, and I got what the Japanese did, and it was horrible to the Chinese during World War II. But nothing about Manfred Nowak's report as the special rapporteur for torture, which was a scathing indictment of Chinese endemic use, systematic use of torture against Falun Gong, against Christians, against Tibetan Buddhists, and Uyghurs and others. So my question is about credibility. You mentioned in your testimony that Dr. Wang Gifu spent time under house arrest.
I didn't say that.
That was Wang Hebo.
That's someone else, so you
Okay.
just make that correction, because it's important.
Okay. So he was not under house, but he works for the government. He does work for the government. He's writing to Xi Jinping. He was deputy health minister. Was he not deputy health minister?
Let me not interrupt.
No, let me ask you. Was he deputy health minister?
Well, then let me ask what the question is.
That's the question. Was he
Hold on one
deputy
second.
health minister?
That is the first question. Is he aligned or part of the government of China?
Jiafu Wang has been part of the government, obviously.
Has been, okay.
If I may just respond.
No, let me finish it, and then I'll ask the question.
After you then, please.
Please, thank you. He has been part of the government, and he may be a very sincere, upright, very focused man, and wants to get this right, but he works for a government that systematically says things don't happen. Now, my question would be, how do you independently verify? I mean, in a country that is closed, as it is, I don't know if you have access to the military hospitals where this practice appears to have happened. How do you, I mean, they won't allow teams to go into their prisons from the International Red Cross to look at prison conditions. They won't allow it. How do you independently verify that even though he may be very sincere, that anything he says, zero foreign customers for organ trafficking in 2016, how do you independently verify that when there has been such a backdrop of terrible duplicity, lies, deception on the part of this government? I mean, trust and verify. How do you do it?
I'm not an apologist. I'm not here to tell you not to worry. I'm not here to verify. That's not my job. My job is to say to you that the international community is trying to make change within China and work with those professionals that want to develop a system that conforms with the guiding principles of the World Health Organization and the Declaration of Istanbul. That's my job. So let me say to you candidly, I respect you greatly, Congressman Smith. I know of all the things that you've recited for us this afternoon in your efforts. I've been in the midst of those for the last decade, hearing the same things that you've heard. The people of China said the very same things. We're not using organs from the executed. They denied it. However, in this past decade, what has happened? The State Council no longer officially sanctions that practice. Whether it's going on or not, I can say to you that's a change. I've met with the Minister of Health and said to her that if she wants China to ascend in the leadership of organ donation and transplantation in this world, they must stop the use of organs from the executed, because there will be no presentations of such an experience in international fora or in the medical literature, such as the New England Journal of Medicine or the transplantation literature. It won't happen, Madam Minister. It's not going to happen. So I've been just as candid in my relationship with the Chinese as you have been, sir. And I'm not here to verify or make credible. I'm here to say to you that there is a move within the country to change. And the transplantation community recognizes what has been an abhorrent practice and was told that it wasn't happening, did not believe it, and continued to work with the Chinese to make something different. In that regard, Jaifu Wang has indeed most recently been courageous, been at peril, and the fight is going on even on this day as to who is going to succeed, whether the old system and the old guard will return to power or not.
Could I ask you,
Can I
are there
make a
zero
comment?
cases?
I don't know that. Well, let me say this to you. I know about a month ago, and I get all of these anecdotes through the Declaration of Istanbul. A woman from Vancouver, Canada, went to Tianjin and got herself a transplant. So we do know that it is occurring still within China. But it's not my job to say to you that it's eradicated or completely stopped.
Could I ask you, and this is strongly for the record, to know this, are there any, I wrote a letter to
You
Dr.
wrote a
Phil-
letter to Philip O'Connell.
yes,
We
okay.
responded to you. I responded
We haven't
to
gotten the
you.
response. Have we got a response?
Yes, you did.
Secondly, right.
No, there's a
This
letter
is,
there.
this is 10 questions.
Mr. Smith, there is a letter from the Transplantation Society, and I wrote to you as well personally,
Right.
which we got no response.
Well, we will respond to you.
Thank
Let me just, before we move on to the second round, with regards to the military, hospitals, People's Liberation Army Hospital, do you have any access to that, those
No.
hospitals?
I don't have.
So we have no idea, I mean, if that's where many of these, I mean,
Sure, it could be going on there.
Okay.
I cannot assure you of that. What I can assure you is that the young people that are going to be the future transplant people of the country, they are not in tune with that practice any longer. I've met them. I've been with them. Now, I recognize Mr. Gutman's going to say this is anecdotal and et cetera.
I love anecdotes.
No, but I can only present to you, Mr. Smith, I can only present to you my experience, right? And say to you that we are trying to change it.
I don't question your motives and the fact you want to change it and you're part of the agent of reform. The concern is no one does duplicity better than the Chinese Communist Party. And, you know, and I gave you just a few examples. And again, the military is where, when I had my hearing 20 years ago, it was the military that was part of this process and security guards, and we vetted the guard that came and gave this testimony, protected his identity big time. He ended up getting asylum here, and Harry Wu helped to facilitate all of that, the great human rights leader. But frankly, when I read the documentation, it was overwhelming, and the military was up to its gills in making money through this.
Can I?
If the other witnesses